All right, well, so let me go ahead and hand over to Gabriel. Gabriel Anderbjörk is actually a longtime friend of KMI's. We've collaborated before, and it's just great to have him back here today. He's the CEO of Inzyon, and he can show us a little bit about how knowledge managers can learn more from market and competitive intelligence, and basically what do knowledge managers need to know to succeed in this area. So without further ado, let me go ahead and stop share and hand it over to you, Gabriel.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Eric. And thank you everyone for attending. And it's really my pleasure to be with you on this webinar today. The reason is, background, me and one of my friends, past colleague here, we published a book a couple of weeks ago. It was actually presented for the first time. And we discussed that, me and Eric, maybe we should have a webinar where I sort of take that as a starting point and see how we can mix what market and competitive intelligence is doing with knowledge management and how they two sort of are brought together, which is actually a topic that I've been working on for many years. But I think let me try to share my screen. Okay, Eric, can you just show me a thumb up that you see the screen? Okay, super. So the topic for today is really market and competitive intelligence and what knowledge managers need to know for success. And what I mean with that is I will try to portray as much as I can about MCI from the perspective of how can a knowledge management organization be part of building MCI, because MCI very much utilizes techniques and methodologies from knowledge management. And then I will throw in this extremely hot topic right now about sustainability. And as I told Eric, I just read in the papers, I didn't pick up exactly where, but I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago that the US as well as Europe now, which we did in the beginning of 2021, has passed a law that it is now mandatory to provide various kinds of sustainability regulatory reporting in the financial industry. So I think that couldn't be better dated. So first slide here, if I need to click somewhere. There we go. Okay, so very quick on my background, so you know where I'm bringing all my sort of thoughts from. I got my basic education in physics, and I have my MBA from the London Business School. Then I spent about 10 years with Ericsson, and I ended up in the late 90s as head of corporate intelligence, responsible for sort of rebuilding that in the late 90s. After that, me and two of my colleagues jumped ship, and we created Comintelli, which is a company that developed a software used for CI as well as KM. And we've actually been mentioned and got a couple of awards from the KM world over the years as well. So I would say we had our sort of operations in both those camps. And in 2019, I left Comintelli on very friendly terms. I just wanted to get back more in the sort of the front line with new projects. I founded Inzyon and started building various kinds of projects with around sustainability and a few other focuses as well. And also on this picture, you see the Gardens of Intelligence book, the one that me and Jesper just launched. And the intelligence and the sustainability is essentially where I'm going to take the starting point here. Now, health warning, the following 2 slides are typically 2 slides that you shouldn't ever put in slide because it's just text, but just so that we can agree on what we mean. All these variant definitions of what do we mean by knowledge management and market intelligence and everything. I mean, there's so many definitions popping around. What I like to say just with these 3 definitions is that the sort of starting point I take with KM is that it's a focus on internal information, internal knowledge, and methodologies in order to make that a valuable asset within a company that can be used for decision making and those kind of processes. The number of ways into that, but I mean, it's really how can we work with what we have in order to sort of improve the value of the company. So that's KM very briefly. Adding to that now, market and competitive intelligence. On the upper left-hand side, you see the formulation here. It's the process of enhancing marketplace competitiveness. Already here, I need to make clear that we're not talking about competitor intelligence. It's not about tracking our competitors. It's how do I make my company more competitive through a greater understanding of the environment that we're operating in. And if there's one thing all these different intelligence operations have in common, is that they deal with massive amounts of information and people-to-people communication. And already here, I'm sure that you working with KM can see sort of a linkage, but that's something that we're really going to dig in further into. And then we have two quotes from the book down here, where I say that unfortunately, this source base and what we're sort of referring to here is the internal sources, all the sort of data that we have in document bases, in our CRM systems, etc., is often very ill managed if there isn't a knowledge management initiative or alike in the company. And if you're trying to set up an intelligence operations in a company where there is no such thing as a KM operation, the intelligence people very often are left a little bit in the dark, or as we see on the lower right-hand side here, if there is, liaise with them, work together. If there isn't, try to propose some sort of KM-like project in order to get the internal operations when it comes to information analysis up and running. That they simply have to work together. Now, that was the text masses. So next slide here. And by the way, jump in with questions if you like. There is a chat, see if we have a, nope. Okay, so what is it with market and competitive intelligence that is different? Well, I would say the key thing is that it focuses on the external environment. Identifying threats and opportunities is absolutely about understanding your business environment, the entire perspective of where are we as a company in the external world. Some people mistake this for saying that they're only concerned about external information as well, but that is far from true as it can be. The way we have the kind of companies that we address with the book are typically large, mid-sized to large corporations. And there are tons of information, sort of silos or databases or in the heads of people in the company about the external world as well. And both need to be used. We need to have external as well as internal. I'm coming back to that. But if you like it, one sort of slide on how you can portray MCI, it could be done with the quarter 5 forces, as you see here. We need to keep track of our entrance, bargaining power, and you see the sort of the different types of intelligence labels: strategic intelligence, innovation intelligence. You have supplier, you have technology. There's so many different types of intelligence out there, but they all boil down to the competitive aspect. How can we make our company more competitive vis-a-vis others on the same market? And I just now touched on this external, internal, and this is kind of interesting. I mean, we still run into people that actually think that, well, I can browse the internet. It's all there, isn't it? And it's all publicly available. I don't need to pay anything for good information. Well, bad news. We have to. I mean, first and foremost, if I want to build myself a perspective of where my company is and in which environment I'm operating, I need both the external, so premium provider content as we have up here. Of course, open sources, they are great, but we need to make sure that we filter out from all the noise, various kinds of web monitoring, but these are just examples. I mean, there are a number of sources out there that we have to use, but of course, also internal sources. And what you see at the, I just need to change or move my icon here. Sorry, it's covering a bit of my slide there. What you see out there are something we call observers. And these are individuals in the organization that you may call them subject matter experts. You can call them sales individuals that are out there talking to customers, but people who observe things that may have a bearing on our interpretation of where we are in the industry. Those are tremendously important, but that means that we also need to have procedures and methodologies to grab that kind of insights. Typically things that I would say very often resides in a knowledge management operation. So the more of this that is in place from the beginning, of course, the better when we start developing our MCI. So what I'm going to do now over the next 5 or 6 slides is talk you through on an overall level the methodologies that we have sort of brought together, not developed, but brought together in our book. and how we suggest that market and competitive intelligence should be built as a capability in an organization. And on each of those, I will try to comment where the KM capability can really bring value to the MCI buildup. So let's start with this one. We say that a garden of intelligence, as we have sort of labeled it, it grows in 6 different phases. And those phases focuses on different types of development steps, and I will come back to each of those in a minute or two. But the idea is that when you go from, for instance, the first one, locating, that essentially means we realize that we need to keep track of something. I mean, we haven't really started. So when you come to the seeds level, that means you've reached a realization. You know that something needs to be done, and you can sort of start planting. And planting in this particular perspective means I'm start getting reviewing what sources I need to work with. I start reviewing what kind of technology platforms I can work with, and I do a first implementation. And then we come to sprouts level. And that sort of continues all the way up to the blooming garden. And when you're at the top level here, we've come to a point where people in general in the company are all part of MCI. We sort of left the thinking of we have an intelligence department behind. We are enabling the CI thinking through sales processes, through development processes, and we're working with what in, I guess, standard terms called communities of practice, and a community like that we've labeled the intelligent community focuses entirely on how to work with the MCI capability throughout the company. And it's step-by-step building up to that level. What is important in the model is that each of those levels, plants, flower beds, etc., you can rest there. And I would say that is something that's very similar to building a KM capability. You need to stop and breathe, because it's all about change management. If you want to implement something like this, it will take time, it will take grit, but you will also, on your way, if you like, to the sort of the fantastic end goal, you need to stop and deliver value. And that's the levels that we have identified where we believe that you can do that without being in the middle of the development phase. So in those different phases, what do we focus on? Well, each level, of course, have a vision and some key matters. I will leave them aside at this case. But in the development part, we focus on the ITP model, the information technology and people. And we also have particular assignments on what we call the gardeners, which are the key individuals in this process. So next slide will be ITP, and the slide after that, we will discuss the gardeners to some extent. And when I show this ITP, I'm sure you recognize yourself in this, because we have information that we need to work with. It's data arranged in some order. You need to get that into acquired meaning, reveal associations, etc. Information is applied by technology and used by people. I mean, this is a sort of the fundamental asset level we're working with. And the technology, obviously, the tools that we need to apply, that has to be user-friendly, and that also caters all that data that we want to work with. And most of all important, the people who work with the tools, the people that we are going to enable to work with and improve the company's competitiveness on the market. So those three need to develop hand in hand in one way or the other. And we'll get back to that in 2 slides from now. The next one I just want to bring up here is the 6 roles that we have identified in order to be able to develop an MCI operation. You need an executive sponsor, someone fairly high up at the top, preferably a C-level or even the CEO of a company, need to say that we need this. Because as I said before, this is a change management project, and unless you have the executives with you, it's very hard to run that. Secondly, someone need to be like the director or the project manager, or someone who really does the work to bring together all the resources that are going to put this in place. And then we need an information specialist. It's this person who it could be a librarian, it could be someone who's been working on an analyst firm, it could be a former corporate banker, whatever, but someone who really loves digging into content, be it internal, be it external. That is a type of role that I definitely know that you could find in KM teams. Meaning this would be one sort of cross-section with the KM initiatives where there could be really, really good collaboration and sort of avoidance of sub-optimizations if the same team works with information and content analysis. And then we have technology specialists. Those are the people that are going to put in place an MCI platform. Again, very much the same type of applications that very often is deployed for KM purposes. So if we can find a cross-section there as well, so we have a collaboration between KM technology and MCI technology, I think we also gained a lot when it comes to getting this capability in place much quicker than otherwise would have been the case. And then we have two other roles as well. One that tend to be very MCI specific, those are the analysts, the team of people throughout the company that has as their key task to draw the conclusion from all this information that we bring in and try to come up with ideas of how does what we now know about the market affect us and what do we need to do about that. I mean, that's a very specific competence that MCI tends to host. And then of course the decision makers, those who are going to use the service. Sometimes I compare this with that you're bringing an internal McKinsey or BCG or something, and the people that you want to work with are of course the decision makers that then will make sure that whatever is being suggested comes to life and can actually improve the performance of the company. Developing this in 6 steps, and here comes now the different phases. The ITP differs very much between the different phases. In the first phase, it's really just trying to figure out what we have in terms of information and technology. You know, where are we? What do we have? Where do we want to go? In the second, still, it's very much on the I and the T, not so much P, but the I and the T are much more focused now on actually getting resources in place. You procure a first system, you buy some information, you still work a lot with external information, by the way, just for simplicity. Third step, cultivating this. Second step, we built a resource that now can be used, meaning get people on board, make people aware of that we're now having this capability, but you can now also start working much more with internal information. Here comes a immediate and direct liaison with the KM in getting more and more internal information into this. And hopefully there are already platforms for that then can be integrated or even used for the MCI programs. And then it goes on. If we come to the third, the plants level, most of the tech part, or most of the information and sort of processing part are actually in place. So what we want to do now is spreading this. Again, a tech platform, we can now introduce mobile versions, we can introduce more APIs, more connectors. Yes. Is there a question? Okay. And more sort of spreading tools so more and more people can make use of this in their daily work. And the 2 seconds, can we mute that one, Eric? I think there's someone that with a microphone on that is. I found it. Good. Sorry about that. And it also, as you can see here, in the 5th and the 6th step, again, we're working very much with people and technology. And the 6th step, it's only about the people part, building the communities that I discussed before. And this entire process, as we see it, probably takes anything between 2 to 3 years. Particularly the 6th step can take maybe more than a year, maybe 2 years, because it's such sort of a detailed change in how we want the CI processes to be embedded in the regular business processes. So this is as a background, where do we want MCI to be? Question is then, what do we use it for? Well, I mean, the typical when you come into a company is that, well, we want to know everything about our competitors, our customers, technologies we're working with, products, partners, markets, regulations, and yeah, that's standard. And when I say regulations, that brings me into the example that I just want to bring into this presentation today, namely the sustainability. This is one view of the landscape that we're talking about right now. All those different sort of squares that you see on the screen are different frameworks for reporting and analyzing sustainability if you're in a company. The key one, of course, up here is the 17 sustainability development goals, but that's really the fundament for all the others. In the US, I know that you're working with the Global Reporting Initiative. You have the SASB. This is the UN-backed PRI, Principles for Responsible Investments. That are many companies are working with those. You sign up, for instance, as a PRI adhering company, and it turned out that if you didn't do what you promised a couple of years ago, they actually started to delisting companies again, which I guess was a bit of a surprise to some companies. But we're getting more and more into the situation that if you claim that you will do what is being said in those frameworks, they will hold you accountable for that. In Europe, we have this EU TEG, which is the technical expert group. That's the label for what is also called the EU taxonomy. And I'm going to show that in a minute. Just prepare yourself for a picture that is very, very detailed. I don't expect you to read the details because you almost can't. But just to show you what is now being required, this is not a please do this if you like. This is something that you have to do. Otherwise, you're in trouble if you're a financial institution. You have to report on these levels. I'm taking the technical report as a starting point, and we also have something called the joint consultation paper for the SFRD with the structures and the so-called principal adverse impact indicators in that. So let's start with the EU taxonomy. Now, the EU taxonomy essentially is based on the entire list of industrial codes. And for every single code that you operate in as a company, you need to classify yourself under certain types of called substantial contribution. Do you do this? Do you not do that? And then there are other types of attributes that you need to add to this as well. So, all right, let's say that we're selling steel. And within that, there might be a number of industrial actions that you're working with, and you classify yourself on those. Great, we're aligned. But no, not necessarily, because you also have on each of those that you cannot do any so-called do no significant harm factors. All these need to be reported as well. And if you then comply on each of those levels, on top of that, will be added, but you also make sure that you have no sort of gap towards the ILO conventions, because in that case, it all falls anyway. And it all boils down to that you are, as you see over here on the right, to have a percentage of how taxonomy aligned your portfolio of investments is that you're going to put on the market. And now we're just talking about the portfolio and asset management market. All this will fundamentally hit all industry companies as well, because the bottom line is that they will have to report on all these lines, so the investment organizations can then bring the figures in and do these wonderful graphs. So that's one of those. This is just an example of how you can do that. I'm not going to go through the details, but I mean, for each of those alignments, you need to figure out what it is, where do we find it, when do we have the alignment log, the matrices to analyze what it looks like in our portfolio and so forth. So it's really something that need to be brought in from external. But why I'm showing this is that these are the kinds of dashboards, if you like, and tools that you would typically also see in a KM platform in one way or the other, because you're used to drawing data out of already internal platforms. And the other one, I'm not going to go through the details, it's the so-called principal adverse impact metrics. All these also need to be covered, and you need to know what's going on in the market for every single one of them, whatever industry you're in, and you need to apply and comply to these in your company. And the same type of structure in your reporting structures here. You need to be able to tell exactly where are we, what do we know about the companies we're working with, what do we know about our benchmarks. So when people talk about sustainability, why do I show this? Well, when you just hear sustainability, most people still that I meet with say, well, I mean, good, we're reducing our CO2 and we're trying to be a little bit better in here and there. No, it's way beyond that now. This is probably the one compliance issue that will be worse, if you like, depending on how you see it, when it comes to administration than anything so far that has been sort of put on the financial as well as the sort of industry sectors. Third thing that I want to bring up when it comes to sustainability is that regulators are also requiring that companies should be able to say that we are active in our engagement. You can't just say that, well, we have a nice index somewhere. You have to prove that we know what we're doing, meaning individuals in the organization will have to be able to log if they have engaged in various kinds of sustainability work. They need to prove that, for instance, we have an incident flagging system. If something goes wrong, we can see that. We have logs on how to deal with it. If you're a financial institution, how do I vote in these areas when I'm representing our fund on board meetings? You have to be able to communicate on those issues. In this case, so I can choose, energy efficiency, ask an expert, and so forth, so forth. All these things that you've seen here, of course, interpretations of what the regulators are requiring, but the bottom line is this is being required in one way or the other. And I would say that this is probably one of the toughest factors that we look at right now when it comes to both MCI and KM in what companies are required to do. And in particular, this engagement slide, I mentioned the two before that. I believe that those are also very much KM related, but the engagement very much so, because that's a people-to-people thing. How can we make use of individuals that we have in the organization? That much for sustainability. So I will now go back a little bit to the MCI development and sort of continue that one. How are things changing? And this is something also that I believe has have a bearing on knowledge management. What you see here on the left is the traditional, what we call intelligence cycle. It's historically, it claimed at least to come from US military intelligence. It's very sequential. You do a planning, a direction, you do the collection, you sort of have asked the questions, you process whatever you got in. When you process it, you can do your analysis and then you disseminate it. And I made a project once where we looked at the data modeling around this, and I realized that if you have sort of process-wise thrown something into the collection box, it couldn't be stopped. Even if you've learned that it's no longer relevant, it just kept going. That doesn't sound like it's really an efficient way of working with this, but no, that was the way they did it. So what we've suggested is simply to change the perspective and say, so you can't work like this. You have an organization's vision, goals, and strategy. That's your driving force. And then you have all those different things you need to take into account when you work with MCI. So actions and decisions, of course, planning needs gaps, collections of sources, processing, analysis, and everything, but they are completely interlinked. So for instance, actions and decisions can, if you need to, come direct out from analysis and insights, and the planning is directly dependent on the actions. We will come back to a slide a little bit later, looking into that a little bit more in detail, what I mean with that. But it's really a type of operation that needs to be changed from what we've been working with before. And again, I think from what I know when I work with KM, the KM processes have already historically been a little bit more on the type of that we have on the right-hand side than on the left-hand side. So I mean, there are KM sort of capabilities that could be deployed into an MCI initiatives as we see it. Very short on this one. What you want to achieve with an MCI platform is that you want to, of course, know what's going on today, but first and foremost, you want to predict what can happen tomorrow. So monitor what we know, yes, but also you need to discover what I don't know. So I need to have both my sort of intelligence management and media monitoring things that are very classic, but also the capability of generating insights about tomorrow, generating trends, maybe uncertainties, and look into the future to some extent. These are both key capabilities of any sort of MCI platform that we're building a capability. And over time, what we want to achieve is really to move from the left to the right. And again, I mean, this is something that the two areas share in common. Typically, if you go into a company that has nothing of KM or MCI or anything like that, there is a lot of information research, and very often people really don't manage to get the information they need in time for when they need it. But if they do, I mean, maybe they have limited amount of time to make use of it. And what we want to achieve is, of course, that essentially as little time as possible is spent on finding information and digging for it. And the majority of the time is spent on utilizing what we quickly can find and put in perspective what I have to do tomorrow. Maybe I should send off a proposal or something, and then I don't want to dig. I just want to make the proposal correct. And that brings us into another little section that I'd like to spend a few minutes on, and that is the value of information. And this is a favorite cartoon that I found many, many years ago. And I hope you see it, that it's big enough on your screens. It's a commanding officer of a medieval troop. And in front of him is his kind of advisor. And he's pointing at a salesman. Or he's pointing at a guy here with a machine gun. And when I do this in public, I usually spend a minute or two to get people to guess on what the text of the cartoon was, but I can't do that here. So the text of this cartoon was the commanding officer telling his advisor, I don't have time for a stupid salesman. I've got a battle to fight. And if you consider that in this picture, if he had listened to this salesman, it's likely that he could have sent home all of his troops, engaged the salesman for a demo, and by that probably fought his battle all by himself. But in this case, he didn't. And that brings us to a model that I very often bring into this. It's very fundamental. And again, it's something that is shared between KM and CI. What are the prerequisites for making sure that a piece of information actually has a value? Well, first, timing. I need to get it before I send my proposal. It doesn't help if I send it afterwards. That's obvious. The second one that is obvious is that I need information that is relevant. I don't want noise. So if I'm sending a proposal, please give me information that has an effect on me winning or not the proposal. But the third one, this is something that sometimes I get critique when I bring this up, but it's also the competence of the receiver. My best example is that if someone would sort of parachute me in a pharma company or energy company, something that I'm not familiarized with, you could drown me in timely and relevant information, but I wouldn't be able to do anything with it. So that is a key thing. And that brings us into the topic of subject matter expertise. How in a company do we keep track of who knows what competence-wise? Where can I really get this piece of information validated or not? Again, something that I see very much in KM organizations that MCI can draw from if you're implementing that capability on top of a KM operation. So this, when I said, closing the value gap and the value of information and how bring in this, a minute on this slide. What we're trying to do is understand our business environment. That's sort of the bottom line. We need to know where we are, where we're going, and what's happening out there. Problem with the business environment is as soon as I've decided where it is, it's probably started moving. So we always have a situation where I depict a strategy, and my strategy is to make my company as compliant as possible with my business environment. First choice of customers, first choice of suppliers. I should be the company that is best positioned in my business environment. But as the business environment is constantly moving, we will continuously have a gap. And when we then start looking at what information do I need? Well, we need information from both of those. And when we look at MCI, it is very, very often so that MCI focuses on the business environment. They can bring that information from internally, or they can bring it from externally, but that's very much where they start. What we also need is, of course, where are we now? What is our strategy right now? And we need information about that, because essentially the information we're looking for are things that will sort of indicate or prove this gap and how we need to fill it. So another thing we need to keep in mind here now, that is when we get the information, how do we make sure that we can use it and that it will have an impact? It's unless it has an impact, it will be of no value because nothing will be changing, right? So here comes, as I would say, the joint arrow of MCI and KM, making sure we get the information, all the information we can sort of acquire on our strategy. Where are we right now? And the business environment, combine that into something but make sure that we use it and we have an impact on where we're going. And finally, in this one, this is just to make an example, the business environment. These are things that I mean, we could go on forever talking about it, but let's realize the business environment is absolutely huge. So these are the sort of the topics that we need to address from the business environment and from the strategic aspect of how to meet these different type of business environment topics. So this is a complex picture, but it's a picture also that is a very good starting point when we think about, okay, now how shall we take this forward? Now, internally then, where does this take us? Well, we have a knowledge gap challenge that we need to address. I always see limited reuse of experience and knowledge. I mean, we're not very good at doing that, but from a CI perspective, we need that, and KM processes tend to take care of that. We have a problem with an awareness of available resources. We have communication barriers due to different terminologies. Inconsistent communication with customers in the market in general, based on the fact that we have different types of terminologies and unaware of what we already have. Slow and costly development processes, much due to unclear decision communication, who has decided what, where. Unnecessary procurement of decision support services, such analysis services, I mean, we can make the list very long, and I'm sure that you recognize yourself when you see it. I mean, we have severe inefficiency in resource utilization in many organizations and huge unnecessary costs. And very much of that is based on, we don't know who know. I mean, it's really down to who knows what here. And when you come into the CI perspective, it's very often very focused on the written information and the external information we're going to bring in. And this is, again, where I really want to tie these sort of capabilities together, because KM, to me, is very much about who knows what in a company. How can I find people? How can I find documentation about who has done what, etc.? And the two together can reduce these inefficiencies tremendously. We have the information disconnect. I'm not going to spend much time on this one, but I mean, you recognize it. You have all the different type of sources, and you've got the different users of it. But how can each individual find what they need to find here? That's another challenge. So, you know, this one I'm actually going to skip because we're a little short of time here. Making use of external information. This is just comparing the two. Very often we work with market research and PR media coverage. Where is it? Who knows? The same question, and we procure that and we get that into the company. Maybe we use Google's or Microsoft Bing. Is that really the answer? Well, the external information, it's overwhelming. It needs filtering, and we could boil it down to finding what we need, but only what we need is the challenge when we're working with external information. We can find what we need, but if we can filter down to only what we need, that is the problem. This is not much about MCI or knowledge management, but the next one is, and that is making use of the internal information. And again, here is, you know, the knowledge management aspect that I want to bring in. It's still the same. Where is it? Who knows? But as I say here, from an information management perspective, MCI and KM, they share the same processes and challenges. This is probably the key statement of very many here: finding what we already know. If I could say in a company that I really know what I know, that would be great. And I had a chat with the CTO a couple of years ago. It's a fairly big company in a manufacturing industry, and he said, I mean, this is a quote: if all our design engineers knew what they ought to know, and that what they do know is accurate, they would reduce the design and development cost by 200 million euros per year. That's approximately $200 per year as well. So, I mean, in any company, that's bottom line money. It's a lot of money. And that was, you know, purely set on the design process, on knowing what we know. So there's a huge amount of money involved in this as well. So what is our problem? Well, I mean, we're talking about something called network intelligence analysis. And essentially, we've got small individual input, subject matter experts finding things. You're back to the observers that I talked about in the beginning of the presentation. Those who find something that want to tell someone that, you know, I know something. And together, all those things can actually render huge returns when someone is given the possibility of sort of putting the puzzle together. Problem is this slide. why do we bring up agoraphobia here? You know what agoraphobia is? I mean, this whole thing about the fear of being in an open space. And you know, why do we have that? It's a very, very old, genetically inherited feeling for this very simple reason. It's a very good idea not to be on the open savanna all by yourself without shelter. The problem is that this has joined us in the modern world, and now people would agree. They're saying, hang on a minute, do you really think we have information agoraphobia? Because I mean, look at all these. Right. People just throw out things about themselves everywhere. There are gazillions of social media platforms where people, they show themselves, they dance, they put comments, they sell themselves. Yes, but by now we know that the social media world is very special. It's like role play, it's facades. But if you're in a company and you're just out of a customer meeting and you heard something that might be of interest to someone, but you're not really sure, and you're not entirely sure that you're right either, what will the consequences be? What's in it for me? Am I running some sort of risk by telling people that I think this? Will I get a sort of, you know, feedback on this? Chance is that this guy who's sitting here wondering whether what he just heard is of value to the company or not will not take the risk of testing the waters there, and he will keep sitting on it. And I know this for a fact because there's a lot of people that I talk to that end up in exactly that situation. So how can we sort of bridge that gap? We're back to the gap again because we need this insight, because those are the observers, those are the subject matter experts that we can learn from in this sort of big picture that we've been talking about. I heard it was sort of a fun story a couple of years ago. This was a former COO of British Airways who referred to when they were implementing, I think this was the late 80s actually, when BA said we're going to be the world's favorite airline, and everyone laughed at them, which they eventually became, and then I think they dropped a bit again. But they had informed all cabin staff that you must interact more with your passengers. And he was on a flight and he was waiting to be interacted with, and nothing happened. So he went up behind that curtain where you have the airport staff or airplane crew. And when he came up there, the purser recognized him immediately and said, listen, I know who you are, and I think you're going to ask us why we're not interacting. And I said, well, yeah, that's exactly what I was doing. I said, well, come here. And then the purser placed him behind the curtain that was drawn, looking towards the aircraft and all the passengers. And when we were standing there, he just sort of withdrew the curtain. Every single passenger looked at the CEO, and then the purser whispered, now interact. And the bottom line on this one is that, and I said, that was a very, very interesting learning experience. You need something to interact with. That was the reason why they started introducing those hot towels that you all have probably got when you're on airplanes, increasing the number of servings and things, because you can't just run around interacting with people. And actually, that is something that can be brought directly into our situation as well. We're asking this guy on the last page to interact with people he might not even know who they are. And even if he does, it might be senior people. So you never know exactly what's going to come back to him. Taking that, as the starting point, we've been working with a model for many, many years now that we call the information carrier waves. The typical interaction that we would like or dream about is that every people in the company are going to send information to the strategic decision makers and executives and everything of what they think, and they can filter it out and do whatever they like with it. And if you put in place a program like that, it will work for some time, but less than 6 months, I promise you, it will be dead again. For the simple reason, there is no feedback. People start wondering what is happening with my information. Am I getting assessed by this? Maybe this have an effect on what happens with my salary raise next year or something like that. So it will inevitably fade. So what we've done instead is that we've suggested and seen it working, that we build something that we call the structural line. And now we're back really to the to the interaction with CI and KM, because the structure line means that we're going to bring external information into a structure that mirrors the decisions and the businesses that we're working with right now. Very much the processes that typically tend to be defined in already operating KM initiatives. It's a very simple thing to do because you can start with cheap external information. You don't really have to take the really big ones, but you get an information flow that starts triggering other individuals commenting on that. So you get the external information, you learn from that, and then suddenly, someone comments on it and says, hang on a minute, I disagree. Now that is a piece that is as valuable as this piece we didn't get from the guy who was sitting with his computer. And if we can trigger that, obviously there will be some external information to the strategic people as well. So we're gradually starting to get something here that might satisfy both the tactic and strategic decision processes. But the important part is that this carrier wave, for those who are not familiar with it, but this comes from the radio technology, that when you tune in a particular FM, for instance, I mean, there is a frequency, and then you modulate that radio into something that you can listen to, that radio frequency, sorry, that you can listen to. And that is really what is happening here when you build a structure line, because you build something that people can comment on top of, and it's all those comments and induced dialogues that comes out of structure line. That is really your internal knowledge in this. It's not really the structure line itself. And following that will be the dream line again, because then it's sort of a part of the entire structure. And this is really a way of working that we've seen a number of times working very well. So don't try to make people just stand on the savannah and tell the world what they think. Not in situations like this, it wouldn't work. But start with giving them something to comment on, and then keep working, and you will have that resource within it sometime. Okay, why do I show this one? Well, only as an example of a project that we're working on in sustainability. Where do we all end up in this? Well, in the sustainability world, we have to build lots of dashboards and all these different sort of trackers that we talked about for the EU taxonomy and the SDGs and everything has to be built into something that is visual and understandable and that can support various kinds of decisions. This is typically something that, in many cases, as I've seen, knowledge management platforms and initiatives do already. And if we can add the MCI on top of this, we have sort of cut lots of time and work in getting that up and running if there is already a KM operations in place. So just as an example, I mean, we could talk about this entire slide, but I don't want to spend time on that. So in summary, last slide. What is it really that I see KM for a successful MCI? Well, if I come in with an MCI project and there is a KM operation already in place, I mean, the structured findability of internal unstructured information assets usually is in place, which is great news to an MCI project. It will shorten the time tremendously. There are typically APIs to document data storage available, so the MCI platform, if a new one is necessary, can connect to through standard connectors. Typically, you would also find subject matter expert location in one way or the other that would be enabled, which is great. Those are the ones that typically will be the observers that I mentioned earlier. Data visualization models and tools are readily available. Very often that is also part of the KM. You might already have, as an example, the Tableaus or Power BI or something in place that I've seen very much being operated by that kind of teams. And finally, processing content metadata templates available. When we discussed what are we looking at earlier, that was, I mentioned competitors or customers, markets, technologies, and then I moved over to sustainability. All that is, of course, universes of metadata that need to be tagged and added to whatever content we're working with. But also, we need to put that in the perspective of the context of the company's processes and content structures. And if that is already in place, again, it's a huge leap forward from starting from scratch with it. So these are the sort of 5 summary points of what I've said. I think that was the final slide apart from this one. Thank you very much. And I'd love to take some questions if there are any. Let's see here. Another question. Yeah, some comments. Thank you very much. But any questions? I'm more than happy to answer.
Well, if not, I want to say a big thank you, Gabriel. This is great, and we will have the full recording. We'll send it to the guest list first, so you can expect that, the edited version here soon. And if you want to include, it looks like you have your contact information, so if folks think of something later, they can reach out to you directly. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
Great.
That's super.
Okay.
Well, in that case, thank you very much for being with us, and hope you enjoyed the presentation. That it added something to your daily jobs. That's at least my. No, let's see one new message here. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.